Picture this. You're 11 years old, standing in the courtyard of an Ottoman fortress, watching as guards force a naked prisoner onto his back and position a sharpened wooden pole at his rectum. Slowly, methodically, they drive the stake upward through his body until the bloodied tip emerges from between his shoulder blades. The man's screams pierce the air as his own weight causes him to slide further down the pole, the wood tearing through his internal organs with sickening wet sounds that echo off ancient stone walls. Your hands shake uncontrollably, but you force yourself to keep watching because you know, with the terrible certainty that only children possess, that this could be your fate if you show any sign of weakness. The guards are already eyeing you with predatory interest, whispering about the pretty Christian boy who might prove entertaining during the long winter nights ahead. Your name is Vlad Dracula, and you've just arrived at what will become your prison, your school, and your personal hell for the next 6 years. You don't know it yet, but the boy who enters this fortress will never leave. In his place will emerge something else entirely, a creature so twisted by trauma and rage that future generations will remember him as the most terrifying ruler in human history, the real monster behind the Dracula legend. Before diving into this forgotten story of survival and suffering, if you enjoy learning about the hidden truths behind historical legends, consider hitting that like button and subscribing for more content like this. And please comment below to let me know where you're listening from. I find it incredible that we're exploring these ancient stories together, from different parts of the world, connected across time and space by our shared fascination with the darkest chapters of human nature. What you're about to hear isn't just another tale of medieval violence. It's the story of how a child's innocence was systematically destroyed, how love was perverted into obsession, and how the deepest wounds can create the deepest evil. This is the true origin story of Dracula, not the vampire of fiction, but something far more terrifying. A real human being whose capacity for cruelty was forged in the fires of his own unspeakable trauma. The year is 1442, and the child who would become known as Vlad the Impaler is about to discover that some monsters aren't born, they're carefully, deliberately created. But to understand how an innocent boy became history's most sadistic ruler, we must first understand the world that shaped him. Medieval Europe is a chessboard where human lives are merely pieces to be sacrificed for political advantage. The Ottoman Empire, led by Sultan Murad II, is expanding westward into Christian territory with unstoppable force. Between the hammer of Ottoman conquest and the anvil of Hungarian resistance lies the small principality of Wallachia, modern-day Romania, a strategic buffer zone that both empires desperately want to control. Vlad's father, Vlad II Dracula, rules this impossible kingdom through a delicate dance of shifting allegiances. The word Dracul means dragon, earned through his membership in the Order of the Dragon, a Christian military order dedicated to stopping Ottoman expansion. But when faced with overwhelming Muslim armies at his borders and Hungarian armies demanding tribute, Vlad Dracula makes the kind of compromise that destroys souls. He agrees to pay homage to the Ottoman Sultan in exchange for keeping his throne. The price? His children. In the autumn of 1442, Vlad Dracula receives a summons that chills his blood. Sultan Murad II requests a personal meeting in Edirne to discuss their alliance. It's phrased as an invitation, but both men understand it's a command. Dracula has no choice but to comply, and he makes the fatal decision to bring his 2 youngest sons, 11-year-old Vlad and 7-year-old Radu, as a gesture of good faith. The journey to Ottoman territory takes weeks, winding through mountain passes where bandits lurk and across rivers swollen with autumn rains. Young Vlad rides beside his father, still believing this is just another diplomatic mission, still trusting that his father will protect him as fathers should. He's excited to see the famous Ottoman capital, to witness the splendor of the Sultan's court, perhaps to meet other royal children and make new friends. He has no idea he's riding toward his own destruction. The meeting in Edirne is a trap, as Vlad Dracula probably suspected but could never openly acknowledge. The moment they enter the Sultan's presence, Ottoman guards surround them. Murad II, a man whose very name inspires terror across Europe, looks down at the Christian delegation with cold calculation. He speaks in measured tones, explaining that recent Hungarian attacks on Ottoman territory have raised questions about Vlad Dracula's loyalty. "Your commitment to our alliance," the Sultan says, his words falling like hammer blows, requires a more permanent demonstration. The terms are presented with devastating simplicity. Vlad Dracula will be released to return to Wallachia and rule as an Ottoman vassal. His sons will remain in the Ottoman Empire as honoured guests, a euphemism that fools no one. They are hostages, human insurance policies guaranteeing their father's good behaviour. If Dracula betrays the Sultan, his children will pay the price. Young Vlad watches his father's face crumble as the reality sinks in. For a moment, paternal love wars with political necessity. The boy sees tears forming in his father's eyes, sees hands trembling with barely contained rage and despair. But then the ruler reasserts control over the father, and Vlad Dracula straightens his shoulders. "I understand the Sultan's wisdom," he says, the words clearly tasting like poison. "My sons will learn much from their stay in your magnificent court." That night, in the quarters assigned to them, Vlad Dracula pulls his sons close and whispers words that will haunt Vlad for the rest of his life. "Be strong. Survive. Remember who you are and where you come from. No matter what they do to you, never forget that you are princes of Wallachia." The next morning, Vlad Dracula departs alone. The last image young Vlad has of his father is a solitary figure on horseback, riding away without looking back. Years later, Vlad will understand that his father couldn't bear to see his children's faces one last time, knowing what he was abandoning them to. The fortress of Eğrigöz, where the boys are taken, perches on a rocky precipice like a stone vulture surveying the surrounding valleys. Its walls are ancient and thick, designed to keep enemies out and prisoners in. The chambers assigned to Vlad and Radu are comfortable enough. This isn't a dungeon, but a palace prison, where royal hostages are kept in relative luxury while their spirits are slowly broken. The first weeks establish a routine that seems almost normal. The boys are assigned tutors who teach them Turkish, Arabic, military strategy, and Islamic philosophy. They're given fine clothes, good food, and elegant quarters. To outside observers, they appear to be honoured guests receiving the finest education the Ottoman Empire can provide. But education in the Ottoman court involves lessons that no Christian child should ever learn. The first lesson comes during their second week. Vlad is summoned to watch the execution of a group of Hungarian prisoners captured during recent border skirmishes. He expects a quick beheading, the kind of merciful death that Christian knights supposedly grant their enemies. Instead, he witnesses something that sears itself into his memory forever. The prisoners are stripped naked and forced to lie on their backs while sharpened wooden stakes are positioned at their rectums. Slowly, methodically, the stakes are driven upward through their bodies, emerging between shoulder blades or through mouths. The victims don't die quickly. They slide down the stakes over hours or even days, their own weight ensuring a prolonged and agonizing death. "This," explains the Ottoman commander standing beside young Vlad, "is how we deal with enemies of the Sultan. It's called impalement, very effective for maintaining discipline." Vlad vomits repeatedly, his small body convulsing with horror and disgust. But when he tries to turn away, strong hands grip his head and force him to keep watching. This is his first lesson in Ottoman justice, and his instructors want to ensure he understands every detail. "You will watch," the commander says softly. "You will learn, and you will remember that this is what happens to those who displease the Sultan." Night after night, Vlad lies awake replaying the sounds, the screams, the wet tearing of flesh, the horrible gurgling as stakes pierce lungs and throats. He develops chronic nightmares that leave him thrashing and crying out in his sleep, but there's no comfort to be found. His younger brother Radu, traumatized by his own experiences, can offer only tears and whispered prayers that seem to go unheard. The psychological conditioning is systematic and relentless. The boys are taught that their former faith was a lie, that Christianity is a weak religion for weak people, that true strength comes from absolute submission to Islamic authority. They're shown books filled with graphic illustrations of Christian atrocities against Muslims, propaganda designed to justify any retaliation. But the worst lessons aren't taught in classrooms. They're taught in private chambers during the long, Dark nights when screams echo through the fortress corridors and no one comes to help. The Ottoman court's treatment of young male hostages follows patterns established over centuries of conquest and cultural domination. Beautiful boys from noble Christian families are particularly prized, not just as political leverage, but as objects of personal pleasure for powerful men seeking to demonstrate their dominance over conquered peoples. Vlad learns this truth during his 3rd month in captivity. He's summoned to the private quarters of a high-ranking Ottoman official, a man whose name history has mercifully forgotten, for what's described as special instruction in Islamic customs. The boy enters the richly appointed chamber expecting another lesson in Turkish poetry or military history. Instead, he finds a predator who's been waiting for this moment since Vlad's arrival. What happens in that chamber, and in others like it over the following months, is too dark to describe in detail. But the systematic sexual abuse of young Vlad follows the same patterns that countless other hostages have endured. The gradual breaking down of resistance through a combination of violence and perverted affection, the confusion of a child's need for human connection with the appetites of his captors, the slow erosion of everything that once made him feel human. The adults who abuse him justify their actions with elaborate theological arguments. They claim they're educating him in the ways of submission, teaching him that resistance only brings pain, while compliance can bring small rewards. They tell him he's lucky to receive such personal attention from important men, that Christian boys should be grateful for the opportunity to serve their betters. Most damaging of all, they convince him that this is his fault, that something in his nature invites this treatment, that he somehow deserves what's happening to him. Vlad's response to this systematic trauma reveals the seeds of the monster he will become. Unlike his younger brother Radu, who learns to find safety through complete submission and eventually converts to Islam, Vlad develops a core of burning hatred that no amount of abuse can extinguish. Each violation feeds his rage rather than breaking his spirit. Each humiliation becomes fuel for fantasies of revenge that grow more elaborate and sadistic with each passing day. During the few moments when he's alone, Vlad begins practicing the skills he'll someday use on a much larger scale. He catches rats and insects in his cell and experiments with different methods of killing them. At first, it's simple, crushing them or tearing them apart. But gradually, his methods become more sophisticated, more deliberate. He discovers that a splinter of wood, sharpened to a point, can be driven through a rat's body in ways that mirror what he's witnessed in the fortress courtyard. He learns to position the stakes so that the creatures slide down slowly, their struggles prolonging their agony. He finds that different angles produce different sounds, different duration of suffering. These aren't the games of a normal child. They're the first experiments of someone learning to transform his own pain into power over others. In his darkest moments, when the latest abuse has left him broken and bleeding, Vlad whispers to his dying victims, "This is what they do to me. Someday I'll do it to them." The fortress becomes his laboratory for studying cruelty, both as victim and as student. He observes how his captors maximize psychological as well as physical torment, how they use hope and despair as tools of control, how they create conditions where victims participate in their own destruction. These lessons will serve him well when he returns to Wallachia and begins applying them to entire populations. But perhaps the most crucial lesson Vlad learns during his captivity is how to wear a mask. Survival requires him to appear broken when strength would invite more abuse, to seem grateful when hatred burns in his heart, to simulate affection for the very men who are destroying him. He becomes an accomplished actor, able to convincingly portray whatever emotion his captors want to see. This skill, the ability to hide his true nature beneath a facade of compliance, will later allow him to deceive enemies and allies alike. The man who can smile while ordering mass executions learned to smile while enduring his own torture, and the connection between these performances runs deeper than mere technique. As years pass, the differences between the two brothers become more pronounced. Radu, naturally gentle and beautiful, adapts to captivity by embracing it completely. He learns to find genuine pleasure in Ottoman culture, converts to Islam with apparent sincerity, and eventually becomes a favourite of future Sultan Mehmed II. His survival strategy involves becoming what his captors want him to be, surrendering his original identity so completely that little of the Christian prince remains. Radu's path offers him safety, but at the cost of everything he once was. He will eventually serve in the Ottoman army against his own people, leading Muslim forces against his brother in battles that tear Wallachia apart. The pretty 7-year-old who entered the fortress becomes a man trapped between two worlds, belonging fully to neither. Vlad's path is darker but more authentic to his true nature. He pretends to submit while nurturing his resistance, appears to learn Ottoman values while secretly reinforcing his Christian identity, shows gratitude for his education while planning elaborate revenge scenarios that grow more detailed with each passing month. The boy who endures 6 years of systematic abuse emerges from captivity fundamentally changed, but still recognizably himself, if himself can be defined as an entity of pure concentrated hatred wrapped in human flesh. But before we explore his escape from this nightmare, we must understand the full depth of the psychological conditioning that shaped him. The Ottoman court wasn't content with simple physical domination. They practiced a sophisticated form of mental warfare designed to break the spirits of noble hostages while maintaining their political value. Vlad's daily routine becomes a carefully orchestrated dance between education and humiliation. His mornings begin with Turkish language lessons, where he's forced to recite passages from the Quran while kneeling on prayer rugs that once belonged to executed Christian priests. The irony isn't lost on him. The same words that his captors claim bring peace are spoken over artifacts stolen from murdered holy men. His afternoon military training involves more than just learning cavalry tactics and siege warfare. Vlad is forced to participate in mock battles where he must fight against other Christian hostages, often boys he's befriended during brief moments of human connection. The Ottoman commanders award prizes for the most vicious performances, encouraging the children to hurt each other in ways that will scar both body and soul. "Strike harder," his instructor commands during one particularly brutal session, watching as Vlad hesitates before hitting a younger Croatian prince. In war, there is no mercy for weakness. Your friend's pain today may save his life tomorrow. But it's the evening cultural education sessions that prove most devastating to Vlad's developing psyche. These gatherings, held in the private chambers of various Ottoman officials, are presented as opportunities for refined conversation about poetry, philosophy, and the arts. In reality, they're hunting grounds where powerful men select their prey from among the young hostages. Vlad learns to read the signs, the way certain officials examine the boys during formal dinners, the coded language used to discuss private tutoring sessions, the hollow looks in the eyes of hostages who've received such special attention. He develops an almost supernatural ability to sense danger, to position himself strategically during group gatherings, to make himself invisible when predators are prowling. But invisibility has its limits, and eventually every beautiful boy catches someone's attention. The first time Vlad is selected for private instruction, he's told it's an honor, a sign that his Ottoman educators see special potential in him. The official who summons him is a man named Halil Pasha, a cultured gentleman who speaks multiple languages and collects rare manuscripts. His quarters are elegant, filled with silk cushions, elaborate carpets, and the scent of expensive incense. "You remind me of a young falcon I once trained," Halil tells him, offering wine in a golden goblet. Beautiful, proud, but not yet broken to the falconer's will. Such creatures require special handling. What follows is a masterclass in psychological manipulation that would be studied by modern experts in trauma and control. Halil doesn't simply assault the boy, he seduces him into complicity, using a combination of kindness and cruelty that creates devastating confusion in Vlad's young mind. The abuse begins subtly with seemingly innocent touches that gradually become more intimate. Halil speaks of friendship, of the special bond between teacher and student, of the honor being bestowed upon a Christian boy who's been chosen for such personal attention. He gives Vlad small gifts, a jeweled dagger, a silk shirt, sweets from distant lands, each one accompanied by increasingly inappropriate requests. This is how men show affection in the Ottoman court, Halil explains as his hands explore places they should never touch. Your Christian upbringing has made you ignorant of such sophisticated customs. I'm teaching you to become a man of the world. The psychological damage runs deeper than the physical violations. Vlad's desperate need for human connection, isolated as he is from everyone he's ever loved, makes him crave even this twisted form of attention. His child's mind struggles to reconcile the kindness in Halil's voice with the horror of his actions, creating a mental fracture that will never fully heal. Worse still, Halil is skilled at creating situations where Vlad appears to be a willing participant. He structures their encounters so that the boy must make choices, small ones at first, then larger ones, that compromise his sense of moral purity. By the time Vlad realizes he's been manipulated into collaboration, the shame feels like a weight that will crush him. You asked for this, Halil whispers during their final encounter, his words poisonous seeds that will grow into decades of self-loathing. You came to me willingly, you accepted my gifts, you never said no. What does that make you, little falcon? The question haunts Vlad long after Halil loses interest and moves on to fresher prey. What does it make him? Victim or participant? Innocent child or willing collaborator? The uncertainty eats at him like acid, destroying his ability to see himself as purely good or purely anything. Other officials take their turns with him over the following years, each bringing their own particular brand of sophisticated cruelty. There's Ahmed Bey, who forces Vlad to dress in women's clothing and perform degrading acts, while Ottoman poets compose verses about his beauty. There's Murad Pasha, who introduces him to the concept of public humiliation by arranging for other hostages to witness his shame. Most devastating of all is Ibrahim Pasha, a former Christian slave who rose through the ranks by embracing Islamic culture completely. Ibrahim understands exactly what Vlad is experiencing because he survived the same process decades earlier. His abuse is particularly cruel because it comes wrapped in twisted empathy. I know what you're feeling, Ibrahim tells him during one of their sessions. The shame, the confusion, the anger. I felt it all too. But look at me now, powerful, wealthy, respected. This is the price of survival in our world. Pay it willingly and you'll thrive. Resist and you'll be broken anyway. Ibrahim's words are particularly poisonous because they contain just enough truth to be believable. The Ottoman Empire does reward those who adapt to its systems, regardless of their origins. Former slaves can become pashas, converted Christians can achieve great power, and survivors of childhood trauma can channel their pain into political success. But the price of such adaptation is the complete surrender of one's original identity, and Vlad discovers something crucial about his own nature during these encounters. He would rather die than become what his abusers want him to be. This realization becomes his salvation and his damnation. Unlike his brother Radu, who learns to find genuine comfort in submission, Vlad develops an almost supernatural ability to compartmentalize his experiences. He learns to separate his body from his mind during the worst moments, to retreat into internal spaces where his captors cannot follow. But this psychological survival mechanism comes with its own terrible cost. The more Vlad retreats from his own physical experiences, the more disconnected he becomes from normal human empathy. If he can endure unspeakable things happening to his own body, it becomes easier to imagine inflicting similar horrors on others. During his 4th year of captivity, Vlad begins experimenting with this newfound emotional distance. When he catches rats in his cell, he no longer kills them quickly out of disgust or anger. Instead, he studies their suffering with clinical detachment, observing how different injuries produce different responses, how the creature's struggles change as their strength fades. These experiments aren't sadistic in the traditional sense. They're research projects conducted by a brilliant young mind that's been trained to see pain as information rather than something to be avoided or prevented. Vlad is learning to think like his captors, to view suffering as a tool rather than a tragedy. The breakthrough comes during his 5th year, when he witnesses the execution of a group of janissaries who attempted to desert. The condemned men are impaled in the fortress courtyard while the entire garrison watches, a demonstration of Ottoman discipline that's meant to reinforce loyalty through fear. But Vlad doesn't watch with the horror or fascination that his captors expect. Instead, he observes with the analytical attention of a student studying a particularly interesting demonstration. He notices how the executioners position the stakes to avoid immediate death, how they angle the wood to miss vital organs while still causing maximum pain, how they time the process to ensure the victims remain conscious for as long as possible. Most importantly, he notices the effect on the watching soldiers. He sees how even hardened warriors flinch and look away, how the threat of such punishment influences behavior more effectively than any amount of reward or rational argument. Pain, he realizes, isn't just a sensation, it's a language, and those who speak it fluently can communicate messages that words cannot convey. This understanding transforms Vlad's relationship with his own abuse. Instead of seeing himself as purely a victim, he begins to view his experiences as a form of advanced education. His captors aren't just tormenting him, they're teaching him skills that few people ever have the opportunity to learn. They're showing him how power actually works beneath the surface of diplomatic ceremonies and religious teachings. The knowledge is intoxicating in its clarity. While other hostages continue to hope for rescue or dream of escape, Vlad starts planning for a different kind of future, one where he'll apply everything he's learned to the people who taught him. His captors, observing his apparent adaptation to their methods, begin to believe they've successfully broken and reconstructed him according to their desires. They see a young man who no longer flinches during executions, who speaks fluent Turkish, who seems to have absorbed Islamic philosophy with genuine understanding. They congratulate themselves on creating the perfect puppet ruler for Wallachia. They have no idea that they've actually created their own worst nightmare, a student who's learned their lessons too well and is already planning how to turn those skills against his teachers. The news that finally secures Vlad's release comes in the winter of 1447. His father and eldest brother have been murdered by Hungarian forces led by John Hunyadi, who suspected Vlad Dracula of Ottoman sympathies. The irony is bitter. The man who sacrificed his younger sons to secure Ottoman support has been killed by Christians who thought he was too loyal to the Muslims. Sultan Murad II calculates that young Vlad, properly educated in Ottoman methods and grateful for his 6 years of protection, will make an ideal puppet ruler for Wallachia. The boy has learned to speak Turkish fluently, understands Islamic military strategy, and has witnessed firsthand the consequences of opposing Ottoman power. Surely he'll prove more reliable than his father. The Sultan couldn't be more wrong. When 17-year-old Vlad finally leaves the fortress of Eğrigöz, he carries with him an education no university could provide. He's learned to inflict and endure pain with equal skill, to manipulate fear as a political tool, to transform personal trauma into public terror. Most importantly, he's learned that the capacity for cruelty isn't limited by age, gender, or social class. Anyone can become a monster under the right circumstances. The young man who returns to Wallachia in 1448 bears little resemblance to the innocent boy who left 6 years earlier. Physically, he's grown tall and lean, with the predatory grace of someone always prepared for violence. His dark hair and eyes might be handsome under different circumstances, but they're marked by a coldness that makes even hardened soldiers uncomfortable. More disturbing are the changes no one can see. Behind his carefully composed expressions lurks something that's no longer quite human. A consciousness shaped by years of systematic dehumanization, a personality structure built around the fundamental understanding that power comes from the ability to inflict suffering on others. Vlad's first reign lasts only 2 months before he's overthrown by Hungarian-backed rivals, but it's long enough to provide a preview of horrors to come. His response to even minor challenges involves levels of violence that shock seasoned warriors accustomed to medieval brutality. A servant who spills wine finds himself impaled in the castle courtyard. A messenger who brings unwelcome news has his lips sewn shut before being executed. Most telling of all, Vlad begins collecting detailed descriptions of different execution methods, studying them with the same scholarly attention other princes might devote to poetry or philosophy. He commissions artisans to create specialized implements of torture, designs variations on classical punishments, and experiments with techniques for maximizing both pain and psychological impact. But his true masterpiece, the act that will make his name synonymous with ultimate terror, still lies 8 years in the future, waiting for him to reclaim his throne and begin settling accounts with everyone who ever wronged him. When that time comes, the boy who was broken in an Ottoman fortress will finally have the power to break others in return. The student will become the teacher, the victim will become the victimizer, and the world will learn what happens when childhood trauma meets absolute power. The forest of 20,000 impaled Ottoman soldiers that will terrify Sultan Murad II into retreat isn't just a military tactic. It's a love letter written in blood and agony, a message from the man Vlad has become to the institution that created him. Each stake represents a memory, each scream echoes the cries that once filled his own throat, each slowly dying body recreates the helplessness he felt as a child. But those horrors still await in the future. For now, the 17-year-old who emerges from Ottoman captivity is simply a young man with exceptionally cold eyes and an unusually detailed knowledge of human anatomy, particularly the parts that can be pierced without causing immediate death. The transformation is complete, but the revenge has just begun. The boy who learned to survive by watching others suffer will spend the rest of his life teaching the world that lesson in return. He'll become so notorious for his cruelty that his name will transcend history and enter mythology, inspiring terror long after his death. The real Dracula, the man behind the legend, wasn't born a monster. He was created through the systematic destruction of everything good and innocent in a child's soul, then let loose upon a world that had shown him no mercy and would receive none in return. In his private chambers, surrounded by implements of torture and detailed drawings of execution methods, the adult Vlad sometimes returns to his childhood experiments with insects and small animals. But now he has access to human subjects, and the lessons he learned in that Ottoman fortress finally have their proper application. The screams that echo through his castle aren't so different from the sounds that once filled his own throat. The begging for mercy echoes pleas he once made to deaf ears. The sight of strong men reduced to whimpering children recreates his own powerlessness in ways that feel like justice. This is how monsters are made, not through supernatural transformation, but through the patient application of cruelty to developing minds. The vampire of fiction feeds on blood, but the real Dracula fed on something far more precious: the systematic destruction of human dignity, starting with his own. The boy who entered that Ottoman fortress died there, as surely as if he'd been physically murdered. What emerged was something else entirely. A creature wearing human form, but motivated by appetites that no longer quite qualify as human desires. And perhaps that's the most terrifying lesson of all, that the capacity for ultimate evil doesn't require supernatural powers or demonic possession. It only requires taking an innocent child and carefully, systematically destroying everything that makes them human, then giving them the power to inflict that same destruction on others. The real Dracula's origin story isn't about transformation from human to vampire. It's about transformation from victim to victimizer, from the tortured to the torturer, from the powerless child to the all-powerful monster. And unlike fictional vampires, this monster's bite doesn't create more of his kind through mystical infection. It creates them through trauma, abuse, and the terrible understanding that might makes right. In the end, the most horrifying thing about Vlad the Impaler isn't what he became. It's how recognizably human the process that created him remains. The same dynamics that turned an innocent boy into history's most sadistic ruler continue to operate in every age, in every society, wherever children are systematically abused and then given power over others. The fortress of Eğrigöz is gone, but the forces that shaped Vlad Dracula endure. Somewhere, in institutions we prefer not to examine too closely, other children are learning the same lessons he learned. And someday, some of them will have the opportunity to apply that education on a scale that makes medieval impalement seem quaint by comparison. That's the true horror behind the Dracula legend. Not that such monsters exist, but that we keep creating them. generation after generation, through our willingness to look away when children disappear into systems designed to break them. The real vampires aren't supernatural creatures drinking blood in moonlit castles. They're the very human institutions that drain innocence from children and replace it with the knowledge that cruelty is power and pain is profit. The boy who became Vlad the Impaler died centuries ago, but his story continues to be written in the lives of every child whose trust is betrayed, whose innocence is stolen, whose capacity for love is perverted into something darker and hungrier. We created one monster through our indifference to suffering. How many more are we creating now? Remember to like and subscribe if this exploration of history's darkest truths has given you new insights into the forces that shape human nature. And let me know in the comments, what other historical figures do you think were shaped by childhood trauma into the monsters they became? The past has more lessons to teach us if we're brave enough to listen.